Johannes, my friend, I know this conversation has been a long time coming, so I'm glad we're able to have it.
Finally, eh? I think, yeah, it felt we could have done it earlier, but I think maybe it wasn't supposed to happen. But I'm really stoked to be here on the podcast with you.
Yeah, everything happens for a reason, and
Yeah,
it's a little windy outside, so I'm actually craving a sauna today, and so maybe that's just the signal, right?
I agree. Yep, yeah,
Awesome. So for everybody listening out here, as I stumble over my words, we're going to be talking about saunas and specifically the product that you sell, but we're going to differentiate both of many different kinds. And so, if you don't mind, Johannes, I want to lay the framework for people as to the different types of saunas available because we're here in Europe. That means that the Finns try to dominate the sauna market.
hmm
But there's also the vast portion of the audience. I will get my verbal fluency back by the end of this episode. The vast portion of the audience is from the US. And so far and near infrared are something that we should definitely differentiate from. So, do you mind just kind of laying out the landscape, if you will, as to what's going on in sauna land? Like, what are the differentials between Finnish and then the infrared types?
Sure. I think most of you might actually know that saunas itself have been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. I think if you go back actually, several decades, you would have first encountered saunas as so-called sweat lodges, which is, certainly in America, the ancient Indians, that were sort of building a tent, were laying hot rocks in with
It's
hot
all a
water.
rite of passage, right?
Yeah. It's I think it's just tremendously important, and I think it has a tremendous history. So I'm always that's sort of my passion is to really celebrate that because it's not like a modern invention, say such like Tesla that brought in a lot of innovation, but it's actually a more ancient tradition. And I think that to me is certainly the first encounter of a sauna. And then you had the Russians with the banya, right? So you see in all these different cultures, you actually see some sort of saunas. And certainly the Finns, I think, what did I hear? I think they have like 2 million saunas for the entire population of Finland, which I believe is less than 10 million.
Yeah.
I should have checked the population here, but
It's fine.
it's
I got it wrong on live on a podcast
okay.
before, so I thought it was like one sauna for every two Finns, but I was wrong.
Not
So
quite. Okay.
it's not quite that.
Yeah, but it's a substantial number, and I
Yeah.
think certainly if you go to Finland, you'll have shared saunas in every apartment, and it just strikes me that the sauna has such a cultural value when it comes to that. So I think if you sort of want to start on a really high level nowadays, you would sort of have the Finnish, the dry rock saunas, the hot saunas on one hand, and the more sort of gentle saunas such as infrared saunas, which we're going to talk about on the other hand. And as I mentioned before, the dry or hot rock sauna is basically it's a room. It's often you have sort of wood panels on the inside. It's nicely insulated. You have a couple of benches to sit or lie down, and you have a central oven pretty much often in the center. And this basically creates hot air. You can sort of pour water on it and you'll have moisture and steam, etc. But it'll also increase the temperatures. And in terms of temperature, we're sort of talking between 60 to 110 Celsius. I'll leave you to probably calculate that to Fahrenheit, but it gets pretty hot for most, too hot actually for some people. And you'll do that sort of 2 to 3 times for 10 to 15 minutes, and that's how I grew up in northern Germany. So Germany certainly has a very strong sauna culture with public saunas. We used to go there 2 to 3 times a week with my dad, sometimes with my mom, and the entire family would just go on a weekend. And then on the other hand, you have an infrared sauna, which, as the term says, it's still a sauna, but heat is actually not produced through this hot oven element, but it has infrared heating panels. These are, panels built into the wall of the sauna. They can be made out of different materials. Some are carbon, some are ceramic, some are magnesium oxide. Really depends. Every manufacturer, I guess, has its own claims of, why this material is superior. But basically, you're sitting inside. You ideally have infrared heaters all around you, 360 degrees heat. And then instead of producing actually hot air, infrared is a wavelength. It's part of the invisible light spectrum,
Hmm.
but it's actually more like a heat wave. So imagine you're sort of sitting in front of a bonfire and you feel this really nice warmth being emitted off the fire. That's sort of infrared in some way, and that's sort of the effect that you're actually using in an infrared sauna, just pretty much all around you. So instead of having hot air, you're sitting in there, the infrared heat gets absorbed by your body. It takes a little bit longer to actually to use a sauna to heat up, so, often 20 to 45 minutes. And you pretty much create the heat from the inside out. So, heat is being absorbed by your body. You sort of generally increase in temperature. Your heart rate goes up, etc. And then over time, you create an artificial fever, also called as induced hypothermia. And over time, your sweat glands open up and you start sweating because your body has to cool itself down. So that's, it's a fundamental difference, I guess, especially comes in terms of how the heat is produced and what makes you sweat. And that's probably the really big picture distinguishing between those two sauna types.
So I want to drill down on a couple of things because we probably have a few mutual friends on both sides of the spectrum, right?
Yeah.
And there's somewhat of a claim out there that one is better than the other. Is it true that Finnish saunas are better than infrared or vice versa? How do we delineate between that?
Really good question, and I don't really think it's a simple yes or no answer. I think, for someone who grew up with traditional Finnish saunas, it's pretty hard to convince them of an infrared sauna.
Yeah, there's always
unless
the emotional attachment, right?
Emotional, cultural attachment, the feeling of, you being in the sauna as a child and remembering that.
Yeah.
So I think unless someone actually really looks into research on either of those two types, they will probably swing more towards one or the other. And my personal opinion is that I'm a fan of infrared sauna. I mean, I'm obviously heavily biased. We'll talk about that a bit later. But I still enjoy my traditional Finnish sauna when I go to a public sauna space. I think both have their place. Both have certain advantages and disadvantages, especially when it comes to home use, commercial use, electricity consumption, EMF radiation, which we're all going to talk about. But I think what is really important is to say that both topics are quite thoroughly being researched at the moment.
Yeah.
And up to now, the majority of research has actually gone into traditional saunas. So we've had this massive sauna, I guess, that came out last year. It was a long-term study with over 20 years looking at men. And, one of the key conclusions was if someone goes into a traditional sauna 4 to 7 times a week, I think the risk of mortality is dropped by 20 to 30%, right?
Wow.
And that's like a massive gain in terms of longevity. But I think the question, and there's probably no scientific evidence on this, I mean, especially I haven't seen that, is whether you'll achieve the same effects with an infrared sauna. Infrared saunas are fairly new. Most manufacturers have maybe been around 20 to 25 years. That's why you don't really have these long-term studies that you have with traditional saunas. I'm sure they will come out, and I'm sure we'll see lots of synergies between those two different types of saunas and the way they contribute heat and overall well-being in terms of longevity. But I think both have its place. Traditional saunas probably have a lot more scientific background, whereas more modern research when it comes to detoxification, human HGH, human growth hormone stuff, that's probably all more linked to infrared saunas, I would say. So to me, it's not a yes or no. It's both have their place and will have their place.
You just said a 3-letter word that's gonna perk some ears up to all the men that follow people like Dwayne Johnson, are like, how does he do this stuff with human growth hormone? But
right.
Before we get into that, let's set the scene for what a traditional sauna experience looks like in Europe, because most of this listener base is in the United States. We're talking the full-on nude experience, right? Like I'm going towel off, showing my twig and berries, for lack of a better word, to the world, right?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think the beautiful thing about the sauna culture and the sauna experience is that usually if you go to a public place, at least in Europe, you'll have a selection or a range of different saunas that you can try. So quite often you'll have like a soft entry sauna, sort of, which is between 60 to 70 Celsius, which is quite moderate. So, you don't have that stepping into the sauna feeling almost dizzy because the air is so hot. So I'd probably start with that and just seeing how you can tolerate the heat. I think, some people always can stand heat a lot easier. others, I guess, really struggle breathing in hot air and they feel a little dizzy when they, get to that experience. And then, if you sort of can stand heat quite nicely, probably do 90 to 100 Celsius, which is quite extreme in terms
So
of heat if you're not used to
100
that.
Celsius is boiling water, right? Like,
Yeah,
it doesn't
but
quite feel like that.
it doesn't quite feel like it. I mean, it still feels like really hot air, but obviously by you staying in there for, 5 to 15 minutes, your body actually gets used to that. And Rhonda Patrick refers to this as like a heat stress or hypothermic conditioning,
Hmm.
which, is really the exercise of exposing yourself to heat. So in some way, we're obviously stimulating the system, which, is challenging at times because your heart rate goes up and, everything sort of happens a lot faster in the body. But you're also able to relax because it's a really nice and quiet environment. Muscles relax, oxygen flow is being increased. So actually, what happens on a metabolic level is pretty amazing, and it's pretty incredible what happens. But
Yeah.
actually, what happens to you is you come out of that fight and flight mode. Like there's
Yeah.
there's no mobile phone, there are no notifications, there's no family traumas or stress, but it's actually like a sanctuary space where you just go in, forget about everything else, and you're being challenged because of this heat environment. So therefore, if you have the chance to go to like a public sauna, whether it's a sort of a spa or in your gym, do that. And don't be afraid of the heat, but much rather, go in there, and if you can't stand it anymore, go out. Don't force yourself to do 15 or 20 minutes in the beginning.
Yeah.
Even 5 minutes is fine for now. And the next time you go in, maybe try 7 minutes. So it's similar to exercise. You have to train your body to get used to that heat, or similar to ice bathing. No one has just done a cold plunge for 5 minutes without practicing it beforehand, I reckon. So
Yeah, of course.
give yourself a break and enjoy actually being challenged while relaxing on a sort of mental level.
Yeah, and for those out there who want to try and bring their cell phone in, as a person who's done that before,
Mm,
you will fry your cell phone pretty quickly, or you'll
yeah,
at least get that heat warning. So
yeah,
just leave it out and detach
yeah,
yourself for a little bit. It's okay.
yeah,
Uh, Johannes, I want to go into the infrared spectrum now, because near and far are what we've come to know as sort of the two options available, right?
yeah.
And do you mind just kind of deciphering
Sure.
for us what the benefits
Yeah.
of each are?
Yeah, I'll probably even go a step back and actually
Yeah.
say sort of what we have. So we have near, middle, and far infrared. So, and this is basically the spectrum of infrared. It's the same when you have ultraviolet, you have ultraviolet B, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the same with infrared. And every type of infrared, although it is infrared and although it's sort of a heat wave, it works different when it hits the body or when it hits an object. So the most gentle infrared heat, and the type of infrared that's also been around the longest, is called far infrared. It's a shorter wavelength. No, sorry, excuse me. It's a longer wavelength that is very gentle on the body. So, when we sort of speak about infrared, we always think about, okay, how deeply does it penetrate the body? How deeply is the heat being absorbed? Is it, just the upper skin layers? Is it sort of muscle, or, even joints sort of level? Or is it sort of more on the surface? And far infrared is very gentle. It doesn't go through the skin. It basically works by, you know, I guess in some way it's a thermal energy that hits the skin, that hits the water molecules inside your skin, and they start vibrating. So the thermal energy being induced, everything starts vibrating, and over time you obviously gradually heat up because the water in your body heats up. And there's a thing that's called a resonance frequency. Now, I'm not a physicist, I haven't done a PhD, I'm an engineer, but this aspect of resonance frequency is quite logical. And if you don't mind, I'd quickly explain that.
Please
So
dive in.
some of you might have actually known that, or you might have actually felt that as well, that if you have, say, 10 people in the room, you don't have the window open, people generate a lot of heat. I think, and when I was at uni, we learned that I think a human individual has like a heat output of 60 watts. And the way heat is being emitted from that person is also through infrared. It's actually far infrared. And research has shown that what we call the human wavelength, so the bio wavelength, is a frequency of 9.4 microns. This is a physical unit, but it's part of the far infrared spectrum. And what we've done as a manufacturer is we thought, okay, we know that resonance frequency exists. Let's produce a heater that actually creates or that mimics the same output so that you create a resonant frequency. So what it means is if you have heat coming in on one hand and you have heat frequency on one side and you have another heat frequency on the other side that have the same frequency, they overlay and enhance each other's. So that's what we use in far infrared and Wi-Fi infrared saunas, although it's a rather gentle heat, still make you sweat because it's that resonant frequency effect.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on, middle infrared, slightly different spectrum, a little bit more intense, and it doesn't quite penetrate to joints or muscles, but it sort of goes through the upper skin layers and therefore obviously increases your core temperature.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have near infrared, which is the most intense form of infrared. It's a very short but high energy wavelength that sort of goes through the skin layers and penetrates muscles, tissues, and joints. So people, for instance, who have any issues with stiffness or muscle injuries, near infrared has shown actually to be superior when it comes to tissue healing, relaxation on a really deep penetration level.
Okay, so we've gone through that, and thank you for laying that out because that kind of sets the stage for further discussion.
Yeah.
One of the benefits that we continue to hear about when it comes to sauna use is heat shock proteins.
Yep.
Do these come out of a particular part of that spectrum, or if we wanted to generate heat shock proteins, and maybe it's worth defining those first,
Mm-hmm.
and then if we wanted to generate them, what part of the spectrum should we be looking for?
Sure. I think for those of you who don't know, heat shock proteins, as the name says, it's a form of a protein that exists inside the body that is being activated or certainly also produced through genome expression when we are encountered or when we have a high heat exposure. Similar to when you have cold shock proteins, through ice bathing, it's sort of the same just for heat. And the interesting thing about heat shock proteins is really that, it is a protein, and in some way it's really supporting all the other proteins that we have inside the cell. So I think Rhonda Patrick, she's done excellent studies and videos on there, really expressing that heat shock proteins are amazing for so many different reasons. And I think we could probably do a podcast on that alone, but we're probably both not researchers on that sort of deep level. But briefly, what they do is they support and enhance the three-dimensional structure of a protein. So what research has shown is that if people actually suffer from diseases, and it's probably true for most of the diseases, that the cell frequency of our cells actually changes. And we actually see on a microscopic level that some cells have a rather healthy frequencies and others don't. Now, we have a very similar effect when it comes to proteins. So the proteins in a cell obviously give you an indication of how healthy the cell or the protein actually really is. And if we can become sick, they sort of lose their three-dimensional structure. And that's where heat shock proteins come in. They're being sort of induced and activated by heat, and therefore support all the other proteins in their sort of healthy conditioning, which in hindsight actually is related to longevity. Because if we knew that, we can pretty much improve the health of our proteins and cells, we can, I think we overall help the body in terms of longevity and a healthy state on a metabolic level. Now, this becomes really, I think, technical when it comes to frequencies of cells and stuff, but in general, they sort of little helpers inside the body that support all the other proteins. And what is amazing about those is that once they're activated, it's not that they'll be deactivated if you don't use a sauna every day. But research has actually shown that once you have this heat inducement, that can actually be around for 4 to 6 weeks and really sort of leaving a positive impression or positive effect on your cells.
Wow.
Although it's pretty impressive.
Like a simple protocol. Even just going once has somewhat of a lasting benefit.
I agree. I think in terms of heat shock proteins, it will definitely leave an impact. Now, whether you can link back heat shock proteins to infrared saunas itself, I think that's one of the most exciting elements about research nowadays, because most of the research that has been done on heat shock proteins was done with traditional Finnish saunas, which did leave participants exposed, I think, to 10 to 20 or 25 minutes with a heat of 100 Celsius approximately. And therefore, you can't really link it back to the different infrared spectrums. What is I think agreed is that a higher temperature, so a higher core temperature, so that, if you're exposed obviously to a high temperature sauna, then over time, because because you sweat profusely, your core temperature goes up, and you'll have the same effect in an infrared sauna. Now, what I'm yet to experience on my private level is actually seeing, okay, how does my core temperature change when I do 20 minutes in a traditional sauna versus 45 or 60 minutes, possibly even in an infrared sauna. I'm fairly confident that you probably see a similar increase in core temperature, which is
Hmm.
why I believe that the human growth, the heat shock protein aspect is very similar in infrared sauna. But I haven't seen much research out there, which is a pity, but obviously also an opportunity for just really more knowledge in that space.
Hmm. We'll get into protocols in a little bit, but I want to earmark this one about timing. So
Hmm.
using finished saunas versus infrared. We'll talk about this in a little bit.
Sure.
Uh, Human growth hormone is a fascinating conversation, especially with all of this the recent work that's come out about biological age
Yeah.
and just the role that growth hormone has played in some of those studies.
Yeah.
And saunas as a benefit to growth hormone, is there a right type of sauna for this? Is it a universal benefit, or is there more benefit from, let's say, far infrared?
Good question, Boomer, and I don't have the answer to that yet. I
Hmm.
think it's something where I personally just want to read more up on that, because this whole topic of HGH is fairly new to me. I
Yeah.
know that we have actually conducted a study with the University of Binghamton that was more in terms of weight loss. But what they've actually seen is that people who are exposed to a far infrared sauna over the course of 12 weeks, using it, I think, 3 to 4 times a week in the evening for 45 minutes, people were measured, and it was possible to see an increase in human growth hormone,
Wow.
um, which then in turn led to a reduction of body fat, I think, for up to 4%. But that was purely with the ambition or with the motivation of weight loss. I think it really calls for another study, which is probably a similar condition, but specifically to look at HGH.
Hmm.
But alongside with that, they actually also saw an increase of serum glucose levels. And
Okay.
the hypothesis that they derived from this study, which I guess is proven unless there's another hypothesis that sort of counterbalances that, is that the higher the loss of body fat and the higher the core temperature during the sauna session was, the more or the higher the human growth hormone levels were measured. So it's a little bit patchy in that sense, because
Hmm.
it's a little bit vague in terms of, okay, what does it actually really mean?
Yeah.
But that was sort of the conclusion of this specific study. So, and that's why some infrared saunas are sort of are called weight loss proven, because there seems to be something going on with the HGH and the serum glucose levels, which in hindsight led to an increase, or sorry, a reduction of body fat. But it's a little bit vague.
So in that study, if you don't mind me asking, what were the
Sure.
key conclusions as it regards to weight loss? Like you saw a reduction in body fat, you saw an
Yeah.
increase in growth hormone. I'm assuming that means you saw weight loss, but
Yes.
were there controls also around the diet?
No, I think it's a good question. I haven't seen the full report. I've just seen the summary.
Hmm.
But what was interesting is that sauna in the evening. So basically they didn't really look at diets. According to the study, it was that both participants left everything as it is, so they sort of were living their normal lifestyle. Probably some had a better diet than others. I think it's pretty
Yeah.
challenging to limiting that, but what they saw is that people who used the sauna in the evening had a higher loss of body fat than people using it in the morning. So
Okay.
that was an interesting conclusion. And also, I think they had two groups of people. One was for 30 minutes or 25 minutes. The other one was for 45 minutes. And it's really showing the longer people used the sauna, the higher the core temperature obviously went, and the more body fat loss has been reported.
That's fascinating. I mean, I'm just pontificating here, but like if you
Mm,
raise growth hormone in the evening and then you sleep and you, in theory, maybe there's a correlation there with increased deep sleep or increased growth hormone going into sleep, and that helps your body repair better, and therefore you're able to burn fat more.
could be.
That
I think
seems
it could
like
also be.
that's
It could
six
also.
degrees to Kevin Bacon to me, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's quite complex, hey, if you take all these different factors into
Yeah.
consideration. I think the other thing is that I think body temperature spikes up in the evening.
Yeah.
So if you're sort of practicing heat shock, any sort of heat exposure, heat shock exposure, it sort of trains your body, I guess, to really working with this heat and sort of, also cooling down afterwards. Now, whether you do a hot shower or a cold shower probably also plays into effect because it
Hmm.
regulates the blood pressure in some way. But it just really shows, I think, that there's still a lot to be learned when it comes to infrared saunas versus saunas versus HDH and all these different factors, and I'm just fascinated by it. So grateful to be here talking about it, but I
Yeah.
still feel like I'm just tipping the iceberg of everything that we're yet to know about it.
And to all those listening, like, there's still a lot of research to be done here, right? Just as
Yeah,
we're learning so much at a rapid clip in health in general,
yeah,
and sauna is definitely one of those spaces. But yeah, I mean, we've mentioned a few characters here today, like Rhonda Patrick, she's done some interesting research about how to mimic exercise with sauna.
yeah.
Can we delve into that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, I think she posted a study on that, but I think there was also a study that came out in Germany last year, which showed exactly that. And that was again using a traditional sauna, not an infrared sauna,
Hmm.
but that using the sauna frequently, pretty much mimics a workout in terms of cardiovascular activity.
Hmm.
And I think if we just look at what happens is, then it actually becomes quite clear because although we're basically just sitting inside the sauna and relaxing, our heart rate starts to beat. I think
Yeah.
they've seen up to 140 beats per minute, 150 beats per minute during a sauna session. Now, every one of us who exercises, or if you guys who exercises, knows that's quite a high pace in terms of heart rate.
Hmm.
Probably squash players, which is quite an extreme. I think they measure 160, 170.
Yeah.
So you're getting pretty close to that. And while you're just sitting there, like your heart pumps, oxygen flow is being increased, more nutrients are actually being transported to the muscles, which means that, muscle recovery, which we haven't talked about, is a big thing with
Hmm.
saunas and infrared saunas. Um, and in some way, you're also seeing a reduction of blood pressure, because obviously the magical word, I guess, is vessel dilation.
Yeah.
So you're basically seeing that your heart pumps basically more blood through the arteries and veins, which means the volume increases because it pumps more. So it's almost like you're training your heart to this extreme heat shock condition, which then, in hindsight, also leaves a positive effect for any sort of cardiac aspects, which is why the study from last year actually has shown that the risk of cardiovascular diseases, I think, went down 40%. If you do it 4 to 7 times a week.
Wow. Wow. And 4 to 7 times a week is a lot for most people, but still,
Yeah,
it's doable. It's achievable, especially if you have that goal for cardiovascular disease.
I agree. Yeah.
And I want to, on two more points I want to make on the benefits of this.
Mhm.
Muscle recovery. I am, I still consider myself an athlete, even though I haven't competed in sport. Well, I did a marathon last year, but like,
Cool.
I haven't professionally competed in sport in a very long time.
Yeah.
Um, Muscle recovery and the use of sauna. How would you characterize that?
I think it's part of what I just said earlier, just recently, is that if you expose yourself to a sauna environment and, first of all, I think you're coming out of this fight and flight mode, even if you're competing on a high level, or excuse me, especially then, I think you're also exposed to a lot of stress because you have to perform. Right. So I think people don't really talk about that because most of the studies, they sort of just aim on a metabolic level. Okay, what happens actually inside the body? But what I'm a big fan of emphasizing is that you just take time to de-stress. You take time to self-nurture, to possibly meditate, or just
Hmm.
quiet your mind, so to speak. So I
Hmm.
think that's certainly one of these effects that we actually see, on a sort of more stress and mental level. But in terms of muscle and muscle recovery and muscle generation, certainly by having that increase of oxygen flow, more blood is being transported through the muscles, right? So imagine you've had an intense workout for an hour, probably high intensity weight training. Your muscles are pretty much depleted, from nutrients. You can't do anything anymore. Now you're just going in the sauna and you're just relaxing. But what actually happens is blood flow is increased, oxygen is increased, and more nutrients are actually being transported to the muscles,
Hmm.
which is where you have all these little cells and your help is telling me, okay, hey, this muscle is tired, I need to do something about it, right? So you're almost like cheating. You're almost like cheating the system because you can just speed things up by just going in the sauna.
Yeah.
So I think that's certainly when it comes to muscle recovery. The interesting bit is, and I'm still puzzled by this, but Rhonda Patrick, I think she basically posted about it, where they've done a study with long-term distance runners. It wasn't
Yeah.
many. I think it was only 10, 6 to 10 that they actually looked at. But what was obvious is that they had them do 2 sauna sessions a week right after the running for 30 minutes. Again, it was a traditional sauna. But what they could see is that after this 12 weeks, the people that use the sauna twice a week or more frequently were able to run an increased distance of 32%, which means
Wow.
compared to their competitors who didn't use the sauna, there was a 32% optimization just by going in the sauna right after the workout. And that's just such a powerful number. And
That's
I just really
ridiculous.
want to understand how exactly this all works, right?
Yeah.
But it's pretty powerful, which is why we, as a company, also we see lots of top athletes that actually use a sauna or an infrared sauna as part of the workout routine, as part of their recovery routine for after a fight or after a workout, after a long run, or even after surfing competitions.
Yeah, and I certainly use it myself when I'm training a handful of times a week when I can. It's nice to stack it right after that workout if you have the time.
Yeah.
But definitely some of the benefits you've noted late in the evening of getting this done. I mean, just getting it into your regimen overall sounds like a great idea.
I agree.
Can we jump into the detox? Because
Sure.
detoxification has, to me, for the longest time, had this really bad stereotype of being juice cleanses, and I hate that. But we're talking about like actual detoxification here.
Yeah.
And so just walking through a little bit about how that works with saunas, and then I gotta ask about the niacin detox. So
Sure.
let's
Yeah.
go through detox first, and then we'll go into niacin
Cool.
detox.
Yeah, sure. I think that was actually when infrared saunas really gained a lot of popularity, because there were a few advocates and a few, I think also reports that actually said that infrared saunas can detoxify 4 to 5 times more effectively than a traditional sauna.
Yeah.
And it sort of works by, well, A, being longer in the sauna, but also B, on the fact that infrared works on a more cellular level, right? So we've specifically spoken about far infrared, which seems to be most effective for any form of detoxification, because if we look at where toxins are mostly stored, it's pretty much around the organs, right? It's sort of the belly fat, any type of fat under the skin. That's sort of where toxins are being stored. And we get so many different options, I guess, of how toxins can actually enter our lives, whether it's through food, through air, through pollution, travel. And I think it just becomes quite daunting if you actually understand what is toxic and how can toxins enter the body, right?
You can basically become a hypochondriac, right? And
Yeah, and that's an interesting one. What we've seen, unfortunately, we've done a study in the US, and sort of actually called for probants who said, oh, contact us if you feel that you have a toxicity, so that we can help you become, to detoxify yourself using a protocol. Unfortunately, I think only 2% of the people that called actually had, high metals or high toxins, right? So it's just a bit of a funny thing, I guess, in society nowadays, where, as you said, like, is a juice cleanse really a detox? I don't know. Maybe for the mind, but certainly not for the body, right?
Yeah.
So and I think that's, the whole detox became really powerful with infrared saunas, and there's still not a lot of studies out there. There are some studies that actually show how, especially for firefighters who are exposed to a lot of smoke and a lot of toxins through their work, simply, that cancer rates have skyrocketed, which is why in some, or in actually quite a few of these firefighting centers in the US, you actually see the infrared sauna as part of their job protocols. Okay, you are out there, you sort of fight against the fires, you breathe in toxins, and you got to detoxify through
Yeah.
that. And the way I think this works is that toxins are sort of stored in the body fat inside the body, and by emitting, or by having this fire infrared being absorbed, everything's sort of been shaken off inside the cell. So you have free radicals, you have toxins, it's all stored there, and they're sort of being shaken up through the infrared heat, and then eliminated through the skin, which is the largest organ of the human body, but also through any sort of excretion, and that's just, I think, where the majority happens.
Mhm.
But it's a funny one. Like, you see quite a lot of people who say the human body doesn't need to detoxify. All the organs can do everything, and it might be true to some extent. But I think if someone really has like a lot of toxicity inside the body, then you sort of, you need an external medium, and you can't really mimic an infrared sauna. It's pretty challenging to find that in nature, unless you maybe do a sweat lodge like the ancient Indians. But
Yeah,
even
sweat
then, it's
lodge
not.
or self rotisserie.
It's not nearly as effective because of innovation and the drive for that. So that's sort of my take on detox. We see, and I don't have any studies for that, but we see a lot of people who come to us and say, "Oh, I have metal toxicity," who
Yep.
then actually follow protocols such as the Andy Cutler protocol or the Niacin detox protocol of L. Ron Hubbard, and they have tremendous successes. But then on the other side, you see people who don't believe in that at all, and I think that's really where, again, research has to be done in order to really reach one clear evidence. I believe in that, and I know it works, but the studies out there really are quite specific when it comes to one situation or one symptom, as
Yeah.
opposed to just looking at detox in general.
Yeah, I would love to see those studies get funded.
Yeah,
Just broader detoxification. Can we? The niacin protocol is
sure.
fascinating to me. First off, the author of it, he a little bit of a controversial figure, but
Yeah, yeah,
also like some of the pictures you see coming out of this stuff is
mm,
pretty gnarly.
yeah.
So niacin detox, for those who are unfamiliar, how would you describe it?
Yeah, I mean, I think niacin is a vitamin, it's actually
Ah,
vitamin B3.
yep,
So starting with that, just to debunk maybe the term here. And this protocol was actually created, I believe, in the 60s. So it's been around for quite a long time. But I think it's gained a lot of popularity, certainly in the last couple of years. And there's a huge Facebook group out there with, I don't know, several thousand people that really
yep,
sort of, practices it and exchanges that, and it seems to work. Otherwise, people wouldn't be craving it and wouldn't be joining this group. But basically, this protocol combines niacin, exercise, and a sauna, ideally an infrared sauna, in order to detoxify your body. Now, there's certain weeks that you can do it, and obviously over time you're increasing the doses of vitamin B3 or niacin that you take inside the body. And for those of you who haven't tried it, when you take niacin at a fairly high doses, you get this flush. So
yeah, you get the Johnny Red face, right?
yeah, you get a red face, and it sort of wanders through your body. It starts in your face, into your chest, belly, upper legs, lower legs, and it's a really bizarre feeling. But by basically exercising prior to the sauna, then taking niacin just shortly before you go into the sauna, and then using the sauna for an extended time, you can basically detoxify your body. I haven't done it myself. That's why I can't really say much about it. It's on my list to do, and I know that. I think the Finnish biohackers, they, for instance, mentioned it in their biohackers handbook, which is great.
Yeah.
So I believe that it works, but it's an interesting experience probably, but it seems to be quite effective.
Yeah, it's quite effective, or I've seen, and this is
Mm,
anecdotally, and I've seen it be quite effective in people's results for heavy metal detoxification in particular.
right.
Things like mercury going from elevated to next to nothing very, very, very fast.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
very specific protocol though for people to follow, so you
Mm,
don't just go and blow your brains out with niacin
yeah. Yeah.
and then hop into the sauna. There's a step-by-step protocol, and I'll link to that in the show notes, of course, so that people can check that out should they desire.
What I
Um,
think is amazing is that this knowledge and these transformations are being actually shared to the public. I mean,
yeah,
nowadays, if you want to detoxify, well, you can go probably to like a professional detox clinic who's probably going to do like a similar protocol or maybe slightly different, and you might get the results. I might not get the results, but I think with this group, although you obviously don't have access to the saunas for free most of the time, niacin is not an expensive product, and
no,
you following this routine, if it really helps you, it can be a life changer. And that's what you read in this group, over and over again, that it's actually worked for people, despite the fact that it was obviously hard because people have to detoxify. But I think that itself is something to be grateful for, that you have these resources and these groups out there that share the knowledge.
yeah, exactly. I mean, the democratization of information is just like such a powerful thing, and so now we
Mm,
can all, and it would be even better if academic research was widely available, but we can all access a lot of these studies and just
Exactly.
be able to make our own informed decisions because it is your body after all.
I agree. There is, but I think it's quite, unfortunately, this whole industry is very intransparent. And I think you and I, we were chatting about that before, whereas, there's a lot of misclaims to be made, which is why it's getting frustrating for potential customers or customers really making an educated decision. So what we've done is we created a buying guide, and the infrared sauna buying guide, which aims to help you ask the right questions when speaking with different manufacturers, because it's so opinionated and everyone says, oh, we get the best technology, we get XYZ, that people actually get lost in the quest of finding a suitable infrared sauna, so to speak. So that would probably be my thing. I'm German, so I'm a big fan of sort of quality, which
Yeah.
is why this whole warranty topic to me is quite important. And I think we've always had a lifetime warranty on the saunas, and that's, to me, itself speaks more than words.
Hmm.
There's no explanation required here. But I think the other big thing is certainly heater technology, which we can dive in. But I'm sure also the aspect of electromagnetic frequencies,
Yeah.
electric fields, high radiation, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, that sort of thing, because it's a
Okay.
real thing with infrared saunas.
We're gonna break these down into pieces
Yes.
because you just went and sprayed the world with all the
Yeah.
differences. And let's go into I think the first one you said was more about the essentially the panels on the inside.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about like the differentiator in panels,
Sure.
because obviously that's a huge part of the experience, and
It
want to
is.
hear
Yeah.
more about
Yeah. I think. I mean, basically, you can produce infrared saunas, infrared heat, by heating up different elements in nature.
it. Hmm.
I think the most commonly one used is probably ceramic. So everyone knows ceramic is fairly heat resistant. That's why ceramic pots and stuff are being burned in order to make sure that they actually last. And ceramic rod is basically being heated. So you put electricity in, the material heats up, and then infrared is being emitted from the material to the human body.
Hmm.
Now, because it is a very heat-resistant material, it also takes a lot of energy to really heat up this material. So therefore, it's a rather intense, it's a really intense type of infrared that works great because it's intense, but it's also very narrow. So you don't really have ceramic plates, but you have thin tubes that have a really high concentrated output for only like a targeted section of your body, say your spine, for instance. That's what you'll always see. You see those spine heaters, that is a long tube.
Hmm.
And that's been around for, I believe 25 years. And we actually, 10 years ago, we had ceramic tubes as our heaters, because back then everyone was using ceramic. It was sort of the latest thing and everyone thought it was great. Then what came probably 5-6 years ago was carbon. So carbon is basically carbon powder that is sort of being put on a plate. So it's similar to a piece of paper, just obviously a lot bigger. And you put electricity in, and gradually it heats up because the plate is not as concentrated as ceramic. And this heat is more gentle. It's is more evenly distributed, I guess, across a plate. So if you're sitting in front of it, you have sort of an even heat exposure, not very centered. And then you have various other things. People say magnesium, which is very similar to ceramic. It's a thin rod that actually starts glowing. You have LEDs versus halogens. So it opens up this whole cosmos of different materials being used. And what we've developed 10 years ago was actually a unique combination of carbon and ceramic, because obviously we did want to ensure that the sauna gets hot enough using this ceramic, but we also wanted to ensure that it has an evenly distributed heat that is being absorbed nicely by the human body. We spoke about this 9.4 microns,
Yeah.
which is a frequency that the human body has, and we wanted to generate that. And in terms of calculating that, the surface temperature of the heater determines the frequency of the infrared that is being exposed. So therefore, a ceramic heater that runs really, really hot, it probably has only a fraction of the far infrared and probably goes more into middle or near infrared because it's more intense.
Hmm.
And therefore, around a couple of years ago, we developed this unique combination. We call it the True Wave. It's a marketing name, but it basically is a combination of carbon and ceramic. So you take a carbon plate, you spray ceramic powder into it so that it actually conducts heat a lot better. And this is our heater, which is now, I think, in the 8th generation. It has a patent because of electromagnetic reductions that we've actually implemented. But part of our ethos at Clearlight is that it's not enough to just have a topical or like a spot treatment of an infrared sauna, but it's a whole body treatment, which is why when you look in our cabins, you have a 360 heater placement of a sauna. They're all around you, the leg, upper body, left side, right side, to the front, up until shoulder height, because heat on the head itself can cause stress. It's from Ayurveda, but also I think most people know that if your head is really hot, you actually get headaches and you feel dizzy and stressed, and that's why we've positioned our heaters up to shoulder height maximum all around you to really ensure like a full body infrared experience.
Amazing. The hypoallergenic wood. First off, Clearlight, is it hypoallergenic wood?
Yeah, we have 3 different woods. We have Nordic spruce and basswood, which are hypoallergenic woods, but we also have cedar, which is antibacterial and antifungal. But if someone has an allergy to wood, they're more likely to get it from cedar. Yeah.
Got it. So it's got that more masculine, sort of musky ron burgundy smell, but
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Which is beautiful. Most people love it for these reasons, right? But yeah, if you just want to double check, that's probably safest to get an hypoallergenic one.
Okay. Now let's go down the EMF wormhole,
Sure.
because there are other companies out there that don't necessarily measure this very well, and as a result, you can, while doing your body good, you can actually be doing it a little bit of harm as well. How do you guys look at EMF/EMR in your product?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's of major importance, because it's pretty much everywhere. Similar to where toxins are everywhere. You have this
Ubiquitous,
5G.
right?
Yeah, you have this 5G stuff that's happening at the moment, which is scary. And obviously, if you look at the way an infrared sauna works, is well, you have a room, like a closet or like a nice looking closet, pretty much, and you have heaters all around you, right?
Yeah.
I've just talked about the benefits of having that, but it also means that there's electricity running all around you. And for everyone who sort of has looked into EMF and ELF, EMF stands for electromagnetic frequencies, which is an electromagnetic field that actually builds up whenever a current or electricity is sort of running. And if you have these heaters all around you, well, it's pretty scary because you don't want to expose yourself to these high levels of radiation if you actually want to detoxify, de-stress, relax while being in the sauna, right? And I think that's of major importance, which is why I think this whole industry now claims to have low EMF heaters or low EMF saunas, which is probably true for some of them. But I think around 10 years ago, actually, we started developing the heater that we did. And part of this innovation that we actually brought to the table was the materials that I just spoke about, but also the fact that this heater itself has actually 2 sides. So for anyone who sort of remembers physics, you could actually neutralize an electromagnetic field if you have an electromagnetic field in the opposite direction, right?
Okay.
So if you look at the heater here and you know that electricity runs from here to there, well, on the back side of our heater, there's a heater the other way around with electricity flowing the other way so that these electromagnetic fields neutralize each other. And that itself is quite simple, but it's also quite groundbreaking because it completely takes the EMF topic off the table, which is why I think when you take a Gauss meter, which is a device that is, that you would use to measure that, the maximum spot readings that you would find on the heater directly are probably 0.5 to 1 milligauss. That's for the far infrared heaters. And where you're actually sitting, we say it's a virtually zero EMF sauna because where you're sitting, you don't have any electromagnetic field radiation.
That's amazing. Love it.
Pretty wild. It's pretty cool. And I guess just maybe to put that into a few comparisons in terms of numbers, the World Health Organization has defined the threshold of concern, everything above 3 milligauss. So everything above that, you should sort of try to not expose yourself too much too often. Some other sauna manufacturers, and what I've personally measured, was ways above 100 milligauss, right?
Yeah.
So that's 30 times of what's actually recommended by the WHO. And if the World Health Organization actually has something on that, well, then you can be pretty sure that it's not just a hoax anymore. Like they're rather slow moving body, but if they report on that, then something got to be true here.
We should start telling people what's on their cell phones.
Big time, hey?
Yeah.
I think the other one is in terms of radiation, while I'm just on that,
Yeah.
what we call ELF, extremely low frequencies, or high radiation, which is emitted from Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. This is obviously also of concern. So ELF is basically an electric field, slightly different to electromagnetic fields in terms of how it's being created and the effects. The effects on the human body are not as thoroughly researched as EMF, but it follows the same analogy, which is if you have high electricity, you also have in high electric fields. And therefore, I think we're the only manufacturer at the moment who actually has done something about it. That's what we call our saunas, low ELF saunas, because every heater has its grounding wire. The wires are twisted. We use conduit wiring in order to reducing the extremely low frequency field, which I think is substantial. In order to really ensure that your sauna is actually a safe space, because and you can just measure it. You can just buy a Gauss meter probably for 30, 40 euro or dollars on Amazon. Just measure it up and actually see whether your sauna that you've bought is safe or not. Because if it has high levels, then don't have to necessarily get rid of it, but just be a little bit more aware of that and see whether you can maybe get like a building expert in who might be able to reduce it, or you might have to reinvest in one.
Yeah, amazing. You guys are releasing a near-infrared add-on soon, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the full spectrum range and all the other ones have actually a near infrared. We call it a full spectrum heater. So this heater already has near, middle, and far infrared in one heater. It's a very intense unit. I think what you're referring to is a near infrared red light therapy. I always like to spell it out because I think it's so confusing with the different types of light and infrared.
Very true.
Yeah. So that's actually launched in the US, and we're just getting the first prototypes for Europe and Australia, which is where sort of what our main market activities are. But the effect that you are actually using with this new device is called photobiomodulation, which increases the ATP production inside your cells. It basically charges your cells, and it's not a gimmick treatment or anything. I think there are more than 500 or 600 studies out there that really show that this stuff works for muscle recovery, thyroid activation, anti-aging, men in their 40s, 50s, 60s who have, slowed down testosterone production. For them, it really works quite effectively. And I think overall, with the approach that we're taking, we're trying to make the sauna your health space. It's not just a sauna anymore, but it allows you to combine different health treatments into one device. Whether you want to meditate while you're in your sauna, whether you want to work on this red light near infrared therapy, and work on photobiomodulation. We're bringing out a salt add-on that sort of grinds down salt into really fine particles in order to be, I guess, in order for you to breathe them in and sort of work on your lung health, right? And I think you can spin this endlessly when you think about synergetic effects in your sauna and just, really making this your number one priority for your health. Now, vitamin D and grounding is important, like, no interest in sort of, for people not to go out anymore. But if you can think about the synergies that you've had with a smartphone, tablet and notes section, email and stuff, it's pretty powerful. And I think that's sort of our approach at the moment, is like, how can we actually bring more people, more value to the people that use a sauna and sort of really want to do something on your health without having to go to the gym, then the sauna, then the massage, and the meditation, sort of bringing it all together.
The sauna as your health space. I think that's a brilliant place to leave off and transition more into those final 6 rapid fire questions, Johannes.
Great.
I mean, look, the first one, this is just like a softball for you. How do you unwind?
For me, it's actually cooking.
Okay.
So I really like this ritual of taking time to prepare my food, and yoga. I'm a big advocate of yoga.
Excellent. What kind of yoga?
Yin yoga. I'm doing my training in June
love
this
it.
year. So, and I think in some way it's also meditation as well, right? So it's a yoga practice. It's not a complete yoga practice because you need that yang element.
Yep.
But I've heard this quote that says, Yin is medicine for the modern world.
Yeah, I like yin yoga a lot as well. Just the fact that you can hold poses for minutes on end is amazing.
It's pretty epic, yeah.
Favorite piece of technology which you've purchased in the past year?
Well, I haven't purchased the red light therapy, but I think that comes pretty close to that. Alternatively, I would call my Aura Ring.
Okay. What book has significantly impacted you and how you show up to performing in your life?
Really good question. There are quite a few actually. I think a couple of years ago, it was certainly what was his name again? German author living in Canada, very big on spiritual books.
Oh, you're gonna throw out there that I'm not gonna know.
Yeah. Power of Now, that was it. The Power
Oh,
of Now,
Eckhart Tolle.
Eckhart Tolle. I think that was certainly for me my spiritual awakening. And
Hmm.
then I think the other one was from Mark Manson, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
Yeah.
Love those two.
Yeah. Both interesting approaches to a similar goal.
Yeah.
Favorite holiday or vacation destination?
Who I would probably
Spend a lot
call.
of time in Australia.
I do, and I think it always really gets me down. Like this really grounds me. It's going to be Australia or South Africa. Yeah.
Okay. And then what's the
Everything with
best?
sun, water, and just easygoing vibes. That's the trick for me.
Yeah, you and I live in this part of the world
I
where
know, man.
the sun is just
It's
absent
hiding.
for
I know.
one, or what is it, 5/6 of the year. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But okay, what's your best trick for enhancing your productivity?
Uh, have you heard of the Pomodoro technique?
Yeah, love it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's certainly for me. I get such a busy job with all these people management, notifications, WhatsApp, phone calls, Skype, that if I don't limit myself to, to these different notifications and just rushing through the day, I end up feeling exhausted because I haven't done any proactive work.
Yeah,
Therefore, I just have to reduce my exposure to being pulled into different directions. So
yeah,
therefore, yeah, definitely Pomodoro technique.
excellent. And where can people find out more about you?
We are actually online. I mean, various platforms. I think LinkedIn is certainly one. We get the websites up and running for UK, Europe, Germany, Australia, New Zealand. And I think the next big fun project is going to be the Sauna Show podcast, which we're launching very shortly. So
Boom, Sauna Show
yeah,
podcast. I'm looking forward to
reach
that one.
exactly, because we've just figured there's no one really, in that space. I mean, Rhonda Patrick is, and she's amazing. So one of the goals would certainly be to get her on the podcast.
Of course.
But I think generally this topic, and as we, the journey that we've had was really highlighting that there's a lot of research to be done and a lot of really smart people to be interviewed on that topic.
Yeah, and there's certainly this is where I find N of one experimentation to be very interesting. There's a lot of people doing some fascinating stuff out there that I kind of look at and say okay, maybe 20% of the time it looks like something that could actually work, but
Yeah,
it's worth checking out.
I agree.
Awesome,
I
man.
agree.
So the show notes for this one, guys, are going to be at decodingsuperhuman.com/clearlight. Johannes, my friend, it's fun to get to record with you, and I look forward to doing it soon in the future.
Yay. Thank you so much for having me, Boomer. It was a big pleasure and look forward to the future.
Excellent. To all the superhumans listening out there, have an absolutely epic